So, welcome everyone. This was super impromptu. Cohen Coletzi just asked me, "Hey, you want to do a live stream?" I'm like, "Sure, I'm down." Because I was stuck in not stuck. I was doing something else, and I was like not really feeling it. So I'm like, "Sure, let's do that." Also, I slight technical issues at the beginning, so sorry about the empty air or whatever, but we're doing all right now. So, how are you doing?
Well, we were just taking the Amtrak right into a tornado area, so that's always fun.
Wait, so in that case, are you supposed to pray to Baal or to Set?
I guess I would pray to Baal. That's my default. It would be a pretty bitch death for a Baal worshiper to die because of a storm.
Default or debalt?
I debalt. Unless I'm doing something specific, then I might anat at it.
I just got it. Sorry, I didn't realize you were going for another pun.
I'm not very good at puns. When you're a really bad pun.
Wait, but you know who were really good at puns? The Punics.
Oh, when you're a really bad pun?
Sure.
Who did Jesus heal when he go to Ireland?
I don't know.
The leprechauns.
Oh, that's good.
Want to hear another one?
Sure.
what did Roman commanders do for exercise in first century Judea?
I don't know.
Pontius Pilates.
Okay, that's good. That's good. Let's see. So here I'm trying to find where I actually have. Wait, is it? Yeah, because I have. Well, so I guess to get started, we're I guess we'll be talking about Sanchuniathon, or rather what version we have of Sanchuniathon's Phoenician history, and looking at it in the context of the Hebrew Bible. And it's one of those things where I know scholars have like long, been like, oh yeah, these elements of Genesis, it's clearly taken from the Enuma Elish. And of course, it's one of those things where I think like it would be wrong to say that it's one or the other. There's clearly influence from that, but there's also kind of what seems like a bit of an ignored influence from Sanchuniathon's cosmogony, and trying to find what tab.
Well, it's very clear that even by the way that Eusebius, who obviously was in contact with a lot of the Phoenicians, being from Caesarea, that particular maritime port, that he was familiar with this, and he referred to it as referring to the same history, that he was sort of engaged with it in a sort of dialogue.
And then on top of that, you also have Philo, who like actually straight up lived in Byblos.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Actually, he factors into the prologue of my book, because as sort of like a literary framing device, he's the one who discovers the tablets that the books are based on.
Yeah. Wait, sorry. Who discovers the tablets you were saying?
Philo of Byblos.
Oh yeah.
Because we know that Sanchuniathon actually wrote a secular history as well of the Phoenicians, but it was lost.
Interesting. So it's like one of those things where, so we've got good news and bad news. The bad news is we don't have Sanchuniathon's history. The good news is we have a form of it, but we don't know how much we can trust it as being accurate to the original.
Exactly. That's one of the issues. That's the question of debate, is how much can we trust Eusebius's relaying of the documents? And a lot of the earlier scholars were inherently skeptical of it. The minimalists were very skeptical of it until the discovery of the Ras Shamra archive, which actually gave credence to a large portion of Eusebius's work regarding Canaanite religion.
So just quickly touching on that. So with Ugarit, I've kind of speculated on this for a while, but I haven't really had anyone else to talk about it that I could get like, another perspective. Do you think that Ugar was like the city god, or like well, obviously I know Ugarit like was like its patron was Baal, I'm pretty sure, but do you think there's a connection between Ugar and Ugarit?
Well, there's a deity Ugar who is the god of the soil. That Ugarit sort of started out as kind of not an extraneous settlement, but in a peripheral settlement of the kingdom of Yamhad, which was this, well, to create context, was centered around the modern day city of Aleppo, and in around the 18th century BCE went through a religious change around the god Hadad, and sort of equated the Canaanite Baal, the Akkadian god Adad, and the Hurrian god Teshub into one deity that kind of becomes the universal god at Ugarit.
Interesting. So interesting. I think I definitely read it, but I don't think I connected the fact that Gupan and Ugar, or Gupanu or Gapnu, which interestingly you see this even today within Hebrew. It's still preserved with it, given it's not understood as a god, but you have one of the blessings, one of the most common blessings is Borei Pri Hagefen. Because technically, this is what's interesting. You're not blessing the wine. You're actually blessing the Geffen, which is the vine.
Yes, because I suspect this comes to represent the fundamental agricultural nature of Levantine religion. Everything in the ancient Levant is based on agricultural cycles. And especially in the Levant, a lot of their agriculture was viticulture, the production of wine, which was used for domestic consumption, of course, but also for export. One of the chief economic exports, both of the Bronze Age Canaanites and into the Iron Age in the Israelite kingdoms, was the export of quality alcohol like wine to Egypt and to Mesopotamia and to Anatolia to a lesser extent.
So that's actually one of the features where at some point we'll end up doing a stream about was it Total War Pharaoh. But one of the things I do like is so they have like four different legacies, which you can which I think they should have had more. And you can't switch them around. But basically, the one that I like playing as the most, especially when I play as the Tyrians, is this Hatshepsut's legacy, where you're basically you can take the resources that you have, convert them into these items that you can then send to other parts of the Levant, and you can trade it. So say you have like this Canaanite wheat or Canaanite beer, and so it might be really valued in this one part, but where you're from, it's no more valuable than the maybe it might be a little bit more than the resources it took to produce it. But you can see the further away you go, the places where it's treasured, that you end up making a lot of money in there. And so it's almost, I mean, you see it today with, modern day goods, how, something from a certain area, it might be a staple there, but the moment you take it out of its context, it becomes a delicacy.
Yes, exactly. Like, for example, the very, very basic za'atar that they use in Palestine, which probably costs like a shekel for half a kilo, is going for, you know, $7, $8 in the United States, because what is normal in one country can be a luxury in another country.
And in a sense, that is kind of the beauty of it, because imagine if everything was just, I mean, I think that, it's not to say that it's good that there's not abundance, but at the same time, it's like an overabundance. Like, given there's a difference between overabundance and abundance, because abundance, um, without looking it up, I'm guessing there's probably, either connection to like bun, which would be like good, like from Latin, or possibly like maybe connected to bound, like that it's going beyond the bounds of like I don't know. I'm actually no. I'm gonna I'll look that up some other time. But basically this
That's
idea,
more my wheelhouse.
yeah,
When we're talking about like the economics of the late Bronze Age. But I think you wanted to talk more about religion.
yeah. But I do think it's interesting how with a lot of economics you can't really separate it from religion because
Yes, of course not.
yeah. Let's
Because
see.
religion back then was based on people's lived experiences. Whereas
Oh,
today, they kind of force, you know, people's worldviews to conform with religion. It's sort of a contortion act. People have to be informed what religion means rather than it just being something that's an obvious part of their life. I think if they
wait,
were making a religion today, it would be a religion of like TikTok and pineapple on pizza and uh, stuff like that, you know.
oh god, it would be like the Cult of the Flying Spaghetti Monster, but like a million times more insane.
Yeah, well, actually, I think the cult of the flying spaghetti monster really captured something about the time period it was made in. People, I can imagine scholars in 200 years are going to be looking over, the text of, like Bobby Henderson's letter to the Kansas School Board and saying, what can this tell us about early 2000s life and religion? The flying spaghetti monster, what was their priorities?
Yeah. So
The town they
something
grew
that
up in is now historical.
something though that I oh wait, what was it? Actually, I forgot what I was going to say. But so it is interesting though, because abundance it means to be in great plenty, but literally to be overflowing, or like to be. Wait, is it flow or yeah? So that's interesting. It's this idea of like um to overflow, and with that, what does overabundance mean? That means overflowing. So there, like abundance would mean there's just enough, or no, I mean there's more than enough. Now overabundance would be that you like there's so much that you don't even appreciate it, and I think that kind of gets to the core of what some of the stuff is. But anyway, we should get into what we're going to talk about.
We'll get into the weeds of the Sanchuniathon.
Yeah. So archaeohistory with a dingir. I love saying dingir. It says question. Philo of Byblos mentions that he got his info from Yerubal, which is the same dude as Yiftach the judge or Canaanite. So I was the. I mean, I definitely like where you're going with that. I was of the impression that Yerubal was actually Gideon. Um, um, but yeah, I mean that's something I'll look into later. But yeah, the other thing that he says, so this Yeruval, and if or actually, I think it might have been one of David's sons that had a similar name. But what's interesting is that you have him that's supposedly like sending this letter. He's getting this
my co-host just stuck out for a second. Okay, well, talking about Yerubal again.
Yeah. So basically, that Yerubal, he's in contact with this Abibalis or Abibal from is it Byblos or Beirut? I forget exactly where it says, but yeah, I think it's Byblos. But in any case, so Abibal. Now, what I'm suggesting is that we shouldn't simply read this as Abibal, because a lot of the names in the Bible end up getting transferred into something else, because like a lot of the issues that they have with the theophonims of Baal. And so with that, I think it could be possible that Abi Baal is actually Abi Milku. I don't know. Like, wasn't there a Phoenician called Abimelech or Abimilk?
Abibal is a very, very common name. I mean, it's like saying, was there a Jew named Jesus? Yeah, there are about a half a dozen thousand of them. But yeah, Abibal is a very, very common Phoenician name.
Oh, but I mean, wasn't there yeah, I don't know. I'll have to figure out what I was thinking about another time. But yeah, so I think that it's probably a good chance that you have. Because also another thing is that apparently Gideon means spear, whereas like Yeruval, like it's not like Gideon. It's much more of like a nickname in some ways. It's associated with him because of what he does. He spears. Is it him? I might be getting the judges mixed up. Anyway, so let's see. Gabriel Pereira said, "I'm currently wet." He's on the plane.
No, I'm on a train. I may be flying in a second because I'm going through a tornado area in Northern Carolina.
Well, just remember, if you get sent flying, you better hold on to your seats, and it's not going to happen because it's not going to happen. But anyway,
I think you're seeing something that's never been seen before on any live stream.
Interesting. So, what about God's? Oh yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
An American train.
So, this is an interesting question. What about God's Mishor? So what's interesting is I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's rendered Mithor, like with a sade. I might be wrong, but my theory for that, because it's just rendered as like a sa, and of course sometimes it could be rendered like a sha depending on the interpretation. But so you have Mishor and Tzedek, and so Tzedek means justice. But what I look at here is the fact that you have Misor, who has a son named Thoth or Tautus, according to Sanchuniathon. And what kind of sticks out about that is, well, Thoth was a god of Egypt. And if you just play with the names a little, you could easily connect Misor and Wasir or Osiris potentially. and then you have Sedek, which would maybe be Set, because they're twin brothers. And they're what's interesting though is what supports this is the fact that the Semitic name for Egypt is Misr. It's the same root. So even if it's not directly Osiris, it's probably some sort of like deified land of Egypt or something.
It's interesting that you chose to translate Sedek as justice. But I think that kind of requires more context. I usually hear it translated as righteousness, but I think it's important for people to understand when they're reading these ancient texts that what justice meant back then is a little bit different than what it means today. It kind of more meant not just punishing wicked behavior, but more so rewarding good behavior. That each thing would be given according to its deserts, you know.
Interesting.
That was a big topic of Plato's Republic, discussing various ideas of justice.
Sorry, getting a call. Well, not me, but no, it's interesting because what's interesting is that both Misor and Sedek have similar etymologies. Well, like obviously a different root, but they mean similar things because the way that the Phoenician history renders Misor is as I think it's upright, which it's interesting. And like I promise, I'm only going to bring up etymology like once, but it directly connects to the both the name of Egypt and how this is one of the things that I find fascinating because how it gets rendered is so dependent on tradition. So let's see. So the root would be sore, I think. Sore. Neck, back of neck. Oh wait, no, here. Sore. Fine. Okay, so here, Sur, which interestingly, this is also the root of Sur, which are like a rock, like a stone, which is where Sur, tire comes from. But so Sur, to confine, to bind, or to besiege. But what's interesting is something which is bound is also more likely to be upright because like it's just the nature of it. But next here, so Tzur. It can also be, so this is the context that it's usually understood within the context of like Egypt within Jewish tradition, is that it's to show hostility to or like distress, straits of, or like that's dire straits, to treat as foe. So this idea that Mitzrayim, that it's the two straits, the dire straits, which also could refer to potentially the two banks of the Nile, but I think at the end of the day, it's kind of hard to say. But that with that root, it also has this idea of upright, and with upright, you have this idea of some like that it is, and that's the reason why I think within that context, Misor might be better understood as like upright or righteous, and then Sedek would be more like just. But that's just my choice of interpretation.
I got disconnected, or
yeah,
I got disconnected.
I was just saying that I think that at least the way that I choose to translate it means.
To a city, say,
are you able to hear me?
My love is true. Going to meet my savior.
You there?
Did I get disconnected or did you get disconnected?
No, I think you did. I mean, I've been here. But are you able to?
I got disconnected.
Are you able to hear me though?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Oh, yeah.
It's
so I was
in and out.
No worries. Yeah. So I was just saying though that I think that Misor might be more easily, like if you were to use the same concept but like parallel them as different sides of it, Misor would maybe be more like upright or righteous, and then Sedek would be like just, if that makes any sense. But again, it's like it's not that like they both mean both things, so I think it's really hard to pin it down. But that's just what. Anyway, so let's see. Yosek, Tree of Life in the corner. Do you study metaphysics? A bit. I mean, like the main reason why I like studying stuff like Kabbalah is because like I don't view it strictly like, I want to contextualize this. I do try to study Jewish Kabbalah, I also am interested in hearing what other people say about Kabbalah from like a Hermetic or Christian standpoint. But ultimately, I do try to separate the two. But or all the three. But that being said, I'm more so trying to learn from it, not necessarily trying to get any sort of objective truth, but just trying to understand where the inspiration for this came from, because I find it very beautiful, and I actually got introduced to it in a point in my life where I wasn't really religious at all, or spiritual at all. I was just I liked how I liked this. I like the systematic nature of it, like, and how like, it's also something that at some point I think it would be interesting to go into its parallels within the Assyrian and even arguably Canaanite traditions, because the whole idea of the tree of life being like a microcosm or the body of like the universe of God, that idea is, it doesn't come out of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Naturally.
Okay, sweet. This is more your area. The Ouroboros shipwreck reveals the economics of the ancient Near East.
Exactly, that's right. Well, the ancient Near East was a big center of economic activity, trade. Obviously, agriculture played a part in that. Local agriculture. So there's local trade. You could basically divide the region of the Levant into various different types of ecosystems just by the way the topology worked because of mountains. As with, the coastal, the western United States, we have this fertile valley in California and a shadow past the Rockies in Arizona, Nevada, Utah as well, and southeastern Oregon. And you get the same thing in ancient Canaan with each different topographical layer that would lead to different forms of agricultural produce. And even on the larger scale, there were also commodities that were traded, like tin as far away as Cornwall and amber from the Baltics. And you can sort of see like what would be bothered to take on a ship. You kind of see this as something more valuable. Generally, trade did not take place by really transporting the material with one caravan over a large distance, but rather more from village to village. The item might travel as far as, Britain or Lithuania, but it never, like, a Lithuanian person or a British person never ends up going to Egypt. It's just that the item gets passed hand to hand all the way. And there are some really extreme examples. I think this is a way of accounting for some of the more unusual finds that we discover that just seem so out of their context, is that they just get passed around person to person, or even from shipwrecks. That's why we found like a Roman terracotta sculpture in a pre-Columbian uh, Mesoamerican site. It
Oh,
wasn't because of contact between the Romans. It was just perhaps a shipwreck, perhaps, a chain of custody over continents.
so what I mean, while that's brought up, what do you make of the theory? I mean, I have to be honest, like, I feel like there's a lot of people who they want to push this for ideological reasons, and generally
Mm-hmm.
it's got to do with like a lot of like white, or in some contexts even like either white or black Hebrew Israelism, um, but, or I guess it would be European Israelism, whatever. But that there's
Mormonism.
that there's people who try to claim, and I think that there's a very good case to be made if this is true. I just there's so much bull crap in the in the pig pen, which, it's one of those things like, well, why is this, what's this doing in this pen? And it's like, well, maybe it's worth discovering, but at the same time someone might have just put it there. But like, basically, what do you think about the Phoenicians potentially have reaching the Americas?
I think that I I may offend a lot of people that it would have been physically possible for them to have reached it. I don't think there would have been widespread trade. I think osmosis of like trade goods having reached between the old world and the new world, that's plausible. I can see that, especially with shipwrecks. You see in the Pacific all the time that shipwrecks were well known, in Hawaii and other Polynesian islands, and were harvested as a source of iron from their nails. There was no domestic source of iron in the Polynesian islands, but they were familiar with iron enough that when Captain Cook arrived with his ship, the first thing the Polynesians did was start stripping its nails or trading sexual favors for nails.
Interesting. So, yeah, I mean,
That's
I
actually the
did.
reason why Cook had to leave Tahiti, is because there wouldn't
FT,
be enough nails to hold together his ship, because his sailors were taking all the nails out to trade it for some nookie. That gives nailing a whole new meaning.
yeah, you've got balls to the wall and nailed,
With my
and
puns.
yeah, but so because yeah, I had seen something about that there was a reconstructed Phoenician ship that had successfully made the voyage, but it's one of those things where it's like, in order to make that voyage, it's kind of like you have to know where you're going so that you're not
Yeah, you
just
have to know where you're going. But there's also the Gulf Stream. It's not as if it would have been impossible for Phoenicians who were crossing through the Straits of Gibraltar into the Atlantic, which was well known for being dangerous and stormy, to be blown off course and potentially to arrive in the Americas. This wouldn't be surprising. Obviously, this sort of event takes place with just driftwood and animals. This is how many animals end up populating remote islands. I think with something as advanced as a ship, it's. But was there heavy trade? I think that's very unlikely.
yeah, I
There was
definitely
no
think that.
trade
Yeah,
contacts or colonies. But isolated shipwrecks, I think that's very plausible.
cool. So, archaeohistory with the
Does
Dingier
it
says,
account for any of the?
sorry, what?
Yes,
You were
I was
saying,
saying
does it
it
account
doesn't
for any more?
account for any like cultural elements of the Americas civilization. I think that's very dubious,
Yeah,
because
I
of America's indigenous development of the points that people would compare to Mesoamerica, from Mesopotamia. Like, we show indigenous development in the archaeological record.
yeah, it's the type of thing where it's a lot
Usually, it's
easier
people
to
who are
find.
familiar with the Near Eastern context, but not with the American context, who would make those claims.
Yeah, or people who they're just they want to become famous for. It's like, ooh, look what I found. But though it is interesting because have you heard about the kind of bringing up what we're talking about just amongst ourselves in like messages before, about the connection between a potential connection between like Iberia, because it's derived from the like Ebro River, and potentially being connected to the root Eber, which is the root of Hebrew, which there does seem to be. I mean, like it clearly pre-exists, just not in the context that's understood today. It does pre-exist the Jewish religion as referring most likely to like transmigrants, like people going across a river. Because I'm pretty sure like I forget what the word is. It might be like a bar or something, but it refers to a river crossing.
Well, I would say that there's only a limited number of consonants in the lexicon of most of the world's languages that there would be complete coincidence. Correspondences along unrelated lines would be unsurprising. I'm a little bit boring with that, but of course there is evidence of, you know pre-Indo-European context by Afro-Asiatic peoples in Europe, in the linguistic spheres, and more specifically in the pre-Celtic substrate in Gaelic, in the Irish Celtic languages, of a lot of more substantial linguistic determinatives in terms of word order and grammatical systems
It,
in between Celtic languages in like Gaelic and Afroasiatic languages like Canaanite and Amazigh languages.
and it definitely makes sense because like one of the possible like routes of introduction would have been the Phoenicians sailing up to the British Isles.
Well, I would say that I sometimes tend to reject the term Phoenician because the way it's used, it's typically used in an isolating sense. You know how we kind of like, me and you, we try to reject the term, like Hebrews are not something separate from Canaanites, and obviously the Phoenicians are the embodiment of Canaanite energy, but you see sort of how Lebanese people and the broader historiography has separated Phoenicia as a region from its Canaanite context.
Yeah, it's like a scholar that I think would be really interesting to have on some time. Like I think I have a small channel, but you have a bigger one. Maybe you could get him on. But have you ever heard? Surely, I mean, if you haven't, no, it's not like always a good chance to learn someone else. But I'm sure you've heard of Curry Malkusa.
Yes, I have actually. I've interacted a few times with him on Facebook because we have some differences in opinions on a lot of matters. Since I think, in many senses, Lebanese people, along their nationalist lines, to develop a national identity in the post-colonial period, had to construct a similar narrative to Zionists in the 19th and 20th century to justify their nationalism.
I mean, I do think that like also if you look at the context, like when both of these movements arose of Pan-Arabism and Zionism, like they arise out of similar contexts of trying to, and again, like in different ways in different countries, they was it what's the word, cooperated, and in some cases actually became colonialists themselves. I mean, whether you're looking at the stuff that's gone on in Israel, or whether you look at was it like with Iraq invading Kuwait, or just this idea that like this desire to to take over so that you can manage this land that you see as yours.
Yeah, like sort of like to embrace European attitudes of nationalism. That's why I'm not as much talking about Arab nationalism, but more specifically along the lines of post-colonial nationalisms in Arab countries, like Phoenicianism in Lebanon, and similar movements like Pharaonism in Egypt, or uh, like Babylonianism in Iraq under Saddam, that they try to draw on a historical narrative to give a sense of national identity that's separate from the Arab context.
Interesting. So almost like what you're talking about. So these movements, it's almost like they are. Here, let me rephrase it. So these movements, like what you're talking about with Pharaonism, or with was it you said Babylonianism, or what was
Yeah,
it?
like sort of the
Yeah.
you sort of see like
It, it,
the ideology of Babylon as the national origin of Iraq.
basically, I think that in the same, like basically, Pan Arabism and Zionism is to each other what Canaanism and like this Phoenicianism or
Oh,
Assyrianism.
actually, I'm just comparing these post-colonial nationalisms to Zionism as in the sense that they have to construct a historiography, whereas I consider Arab nationalism to be more a representation of people's general lives in the 19th and 20th century in the Arab before the divisions of colonialism took place and before the Arab world was segmented by European powers.
I mean, what about the Ottoman Empire though?
Yeah, Ottoman Empire is and another example of that. Obviously the Ottoman Empire essentially survived ideologically in different movements in Turkey and in the Arab world that have come to increasing modern prominence through the soft power of, shows like Ertugrul and the Magnificent Century, where they sort of celebrate this Ottoman Islamic nationalist heritage. And it's very popular actually in North Africa as well. You see a lot of people, specifically in Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, and Egypt, and even further afield, like in Pakistan, who are very eager to accept this Ottoman ideology. Because it's hard to argue that things weren't generally better off before colonialism under the Ottomans. That's their best argument. The best argument against them is that it was also quite a, I wouldn't say a primitive system, but it was in many respects a less
Byzantine.
developed bureaucracy and state by the time of the 19th century.
One could even call it. Oh, I was just going to say one could even call. Oh, sorry.
Arbitrary justice. That people like the idea of a strong leader who can execute what they see as necessary good without being constrained by social limitation.
So, in other words,
about praising the Ottoman sultans because they can execute traitors to their system without due process, without controversy, essentially.
Interesting. So, in other words, you could say
there's an interestingly conservative ideology.
So, in other words, you could say their system was very Byzantine.
Yeah, it was Byzantine. It was superficially Islamic, in that the Ottoman Empire was superficially Muslim, but its institutions were more conservative and sort of arbitrary principles of the ruler decides things that had been kind of prevalent since the time of the pharaohs, as opposed to having a rule of law, sort of law code that could limit the power of leaders, but also limit the ability of leaders to represent the needs of the people.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's move on to the next thing. So, Archaeohistory with the Dinger says, is Dead Sea actually Sea of Moat? And Hadar Mawat is this be Hadar Mawat or Hadar Maut, the yard of Moat. So I don't know what you're referring to with Hadar Mawat, but with Dead Sea, I mean, so it's interesting because Dead Sea, the way it's referred to, at least in Hebrew, is Yam HaMelach. Now, again, if it was originally referred to as the Dead Sea or the Sea of Death, there's a reason why it wouldn't be referred to that in Jewish tradition anymore, and that's because the same reason why the sun is called Chama rabbinically, and that the moon is Levana, rather than Shamash or Shemesh and Yareach, because they wanted to avoid using the names of. I mean, it's interesting because they want to avoid using the names of gods that they don't end up associating with, like, the Hebrew God, or the biblical God, which is itself kind of a false premise, but that so like Shamash and Yareach, those fall out of use, but then names like Tzedek, that's fine because it gets applied to God. The name El, fine, applied to God. Name Yah, fine, it's applied to God. Even Baal is applied to God, and it's only really with I forget which reforms that you have this. It's one of the prophets that says, like, no longer will you call me Baali, my Baal, you will call me Ishi, my man, or my husband. And both words mean husband. So it's basically saying, call me your husband, but call me it by saying my man, not my Baal, my master.
Mm-hmm.
There's
an interesting juxtaposition in many of these books of the Bible, sort of. They portray Israel as the adulterous wife to the long-suffering husband of Yahweh. But the interesting thing is, I think it's just easily to say the opposite perspective from the modern time, where Yahweh is the abusive husband and Israel is the long-suffering wife, the abused wife.
Interesting. That's actually really, really well. Not actually, not that I'm surprised, but is really, really well said. Let's see. They said, "Thank you, Ariel. Very informative." Don't forget Cohen Koletz. He's also very informative.
I'm informative, but I'm also, I could be promoted. Yeah, I've gotten that. I can't be the high priest of Baal because I don't have any joints on me. I don't have any ganja.
I thought it was
But I
frankincense.
guess I guess it would have to be gunbal.
Yeah.
We don't say ja.
I mean, the funny thing is that it got syncretized that way, but ganja is actually from the Ganges, not from Ya.
Yeah, that's funny.
Let's see.
That is funny, you know. Well, I mean, like, when I'm saying puns, these are not insignificant things. In the ancient world, puns weren't just funny; they were symbolic and they carried deeper meaning.
Plays on words as well. Like, for instance, something that's kind of interesting that I mean, so I ended up realizing that if you reverse my name, so like if you take Ariel, Ariel, you get reverse it Leira. Okay, not anything big. But then I realized you put that into Hebrew, it becomes so Aleph Resh Yud Aleph Lamed reverse becomes Lamed Aleph Lo, no or not or do not, and then Yud Resh Aleph, which is Yira, which is fear, or awe. Which I mean, I choose as fear because I want to have awe, but I don't want to have fear. But it's one of those things where like I don't take it too seriously, but you definitely can draw out spiritual meaning from that. I just think there's an issue when people end up being like, oh, when they see it like nothing's a coincidence. Rather than getting meaning from coincidences, they seek to make all coincidences.
Yeah. They seem that there's some sort of like academic meaning, but I separate like I am a priest and I'm an academic, but I'm also an artist and a writer and a poet. Here, the people of my body of work along different lines. Poetry in the way that an academic or even a literary work can't. I think there's a reason why the chief thing that these bureaucrats were trained in for thousands of years was poetry, because you can't really understand the human condition without poetry.
Definitely. Let's see.
That's my little panegyric about poetry.
Yeah, I definitely relate to a lot of what you said. I mean, yeah. So Graham said, "What's up, y'all?" Aitana Martin said, "Hello." Also, it's interesting. I don't know what background you come from, Aitana, but like the name Aitan or Aitana, was it? It has a meaning in Semitic. It's like I think it's connected to tree or strength. I forget which.
I know that Ait is a word for mountain in the Moroccan and Moroccan Amazigh languages. So they'll have mountains like Ait bin Hadu.
Isn't there also like Ataya? Or Atias?
Yeah.
One cent. But anyway, let's see. So archaeohistory with the Dinger said, according to some scholars, Kronos, father of time, of Book of Enoch, El of Kronos, Philo of Byblos, had a son named Judah. Any opinion or more info on this? So I can show you where this is coming from. Should be at the bottom here. Let's see. Here. Okay, wait. It's E on human sacrifice. So shortly afterwards, Philo of Byblos says, among ancient peoples, in critically dangerous situations, it was customary for the rulers of a city or people, rather than lose everyone, to provide the clearest of their children as a propitiatory sacrifice to the avenging deities. The children thus given up were slaughtered according to a secret ritual. Now Kronos, or El, whom the Phoenicians call El, who is in their land and who was later deified basically after his death as the star of Kronos, or the star of Saturn, had an only son by a local bride named Anobret. And that's probably connected to Beirut, potentially. And therefore, they called him Yedud. Now, if you were to Like so, Yadid. It's from the root dud, which means beloved. Now they're saying that even now amongst the Phoenicians, the only son is given this name. Now, what's interesting is that the word that's used to refer to an only son, at least in Hebrew, like tradition now, or like Jewish tradition now, at least as it's rendered in the Bible, is Yachid. Yachid, not Yadid. But in any case, there probably is a connection there. In any case, you do have the idea that David is metaphorically, but probably at some point was literally referred to as the son of God, and that David, Dud, or like Daoud, right, that's the Arabic pronunciation, but like oh, sorry, I thought that was you talking. But so basically, with this idea, with this, it's probably where the story of Abraham and Isaac comes from. But then also you have this idea that like the Yedud, you can see that referenced within the name of David. But yeah, this is probably a pretty clear reference to well, that's the other thing. It's possible to view this as, I mean, some people would say that Yehud is Yehud, but I think it's more likely that instead of Judah, it's actually a reference to either David or more likely Isaac being referred to as the Ben Yachid, or like the Yachid, the special. It means special, but it can also mean only. And because Yachad means like united or together, it can also mean like singular. So it's this idea of specialness because of only, which again, it's not referring to his only son. It's actually referring to his only son by Sarah. Or, well, if you're referring to Abraham and Sarah, or in this case to Anobrit, in the same way that Ishmael was his only son by Hagar. Well, until he had more children with her.
It looks like we're going to be stretching our legs in Canapolis, the city of the Canaanites.
Huh?
Canapolis in North Carolina.
Oh, there's actually a place called that?
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny.
Interestingly enough, because there's delays because of the storm.
Ball waits for no man.
Again, if you wish to step out, we have no estimated time when we will be depart. We will depart in Canapolis through the trees down ahead of us.
Canapolis. Canaanite.
Yeah, a tree came down.
What?
Oh, well, there's a restroom on the train, babe. But we can get off also.
So,
okay, so...
No.
Okay, well, what was we talking about?
We're talking about like the concept of the only son or the special son that's sacrificed.
Oh, we're talking about human sacrifice. So it's interesting. Want me to stay here? Yeah, I'll stay here. Why don't you get off and I stay?
So I'll just cover in the meantime. So what about the deity Anathiahu, or Anathial from Elephantine? So it's interesting because this is probably one of the easy connections to the story of Passover, because originally there is a context of Pesach, or the Pesach, the Passover, in the context of like a non-monotheistic, non like strictly Israelite context. But the story, the connection with the escape from Egypt, that probably has something to do with this, because of the role of the sacrificing of the goat, or of the lamb, of the kid, and the fact that Elephantine, which was where the temple complex to Yao and to Anat was, you also had in that same city a temple to Khanum, who happened to be represented as a lamb. So it's basically the equivalent of, if you have, this is basically the equivalent to if Jews during or like right in front of right in front of a church, they started taking Jesus shaped crackers and nailing them to the wall. Like that would be the equivalent. That's how the Egyptians would have seen it, except in this case it wasn't just like images. This was literally understood as like manifestations of that god. And so the sacrifice of them, it wasn't seen as holy to the Egyptians. It would have been seen as or not heretical. It would have been seen as blasphemous. Oh, oh no! He was knocked out by a storm. Well, oh, here he's back. So, wait, I don't even remember what I was saying. What was I saying?
I think we're talking about human sacrifice, and I was going to actually talk about that because there's a weird thing that happens again and again and again in the Baal epic that I kind of wanted to talk about that's kind of related to the sacrifice thing. And I really thought about too much before.
Is it about how he's basically like, it's kind of almost like, it's just, what's the word? It's shoehorned into the narrative. It's like not really talked about, but the fact that he's like, why does Baal need to die to moat? Like, why is he being?
Yes, that's a good question. Why does he need to be the human sacrifice? And this happens again and again because when Yom is sort of demanding that Baal be given over to him, like El just basically acquiesces to that automatically. But then when Mot asks for Baal, essentially in the same way, Baal uses essentially the same wording to offer himself to the god of death. He sacrifices himself, like the lamb. Like Christians will know what that is.
It's also interesting because when Anat threatens El, she says, let Baal build his home, or I will make your lamb white beard like run red with blood. And it's interesting because this idea of the white lamb and then the blood that gets picked up really heavily in Christianity, especially this idea that it's the blood of El, the blood of God.
Yeah, Christianity, like the connections between Christianity and Canaanite religion is not missed, by Lebanese Christians, that they get to the point where a lot of Lebanese Christians simply believe that Baal was sent by God sort of as a premonition of Jesus.
And then you have the evangelicals who are like, Baal, he's the devil.
Well, that's kind of like a later construction. That's one thing I do like about these Phoenicianists is they actually worked on rehabilitating Baal and taking more honest scholarship as to what actually was the cult of Baal, rather than just simply relying on the most extreme and negative versions of the portrayals in the Old Testament.
Yeah, so while you were like disconnected, I was just mentioning how the reason why, like the connection between the Anat and Yahweh temple in Elephantine and the Passover idea of like, let us go out into the wilderness that we can sacrifice to Yah. It's like, why can't you sacrifice in Egypt? Because them sacrificing in Egypt, sacrificing lambs in Egypt, in the same city as where Hanum is, if they were doing this in Elephantine, or really anywhere in Egypt, but especially there, would be like the equivalent of going to the Vatican and then taking a bunch of like I guess people who literally believe they're Jesus incarnate or some, or I don't know what. No, just say you take cookies. Say you take cookies that are baked to be like real life, real life size. Oh, you there? Oh shoot! Did I just get disconnected? Oh, you there? Shoot. Uh-oh. Hello? Shoot, I might need to restart. I can't hear you. 1 second. I'm reloading. Shoot, what happened? Shoot. Let me see. In the meantime, let's see. Let's see what happened. Probably rejoining. Here, let me just get the share screen back up. Oh, there he is. Here, let me just share screen. Phoenician perspectives. You tap. Okay, here. Oh, wait. Cohen still has to add, connect. Oh, shoot. So this has happened before. Yeah. They'll need to connect their mic or camera before you can add them to the stream. Shoot. Refresh. It says you need to connect. Okay, there it is. Sweet. All right. Yes. Archon's attack. And even now, it's there's still a... Well, actually, this isn't the Archons. I think this is just Baal. He sent a storm. Yeah, so in the meantime, you know what we could do? So for now, what I will do, just because I need to get ready for what I have to do. I mean, I'll start getting going when it's closer to time. But here, so Phoenician cosmogony. Phoenician cosmogony. We'll listen to this until he gets back. Okay, wait, I think we might be making some progress. Here, I'll try remove, add back. All right. Anyway, here.
One of the better things that I decided to do in my adult life was to see a therapist.
If, like me, you suffer inside.
The theology of the
So
Phoenicians
here, we'll skip to...
is Sanchuniathon, an author of great antiquity, and older, as they say, than the Trojan times, one whom they testify to have been approved for the accuracy and truth of his Phoenician history. Philo of Byblos, not the Hebrew, translated his whole work from the Phoenician language into the Greek and published it. The author in our own day of the compilations against us, that is, Porphyry of Tyre, the Neoplatonist, mentions these things in the 4th book of his treatise against the Christians, where he bears the following testimony to Sanchuniathon, word for word. Of the affairs of the Jews, the truest history, because the most in accordance with their places and names, is that of Sanchuniathon of Berytus, who received the records from Hierombalus, the priest of the god Yewo. He dedicated his history
Do you hear
to
this?
Abibalus.
Wait. From... Okay, no, so it wasn't Hierombalus, it was Hierombalus. Which, if that's the case, this actually seems... Hierombalus, the priest of the god... This seems that it's referring to Hiram. And potentially in this case, because I know there was a tradition that there were 2 Hirams. There was King Hiram and there was the Hiram that built the temple, even though that King Hiram sent the Cedars of Lebanon for help in building the temple. You have a Hiram who's an architect. And at the end of the day, you're not... Let's be honest. You are not going to be allowed to build the temple or to design the temple unless you're a priest. I mean, maybe a builder, but you'd probably have to be like, connected somehow. But especially if you're designing it, I mean, this is like Bezalel. He's the one who designed the tabernacle. So how are you going to tell me? Well, but see, there's a thing. I think the argument is that these are priests before it's strictly Kohanim, or rather the tribe of the tribe of Levi that becomes the sole Kohanim, and the fact that they're the only Kohanim. Imply like that it said that they're the only ones who are supposed to be Kohanim implies that there was a time before that, and I mean we know that there was. It would have been like lay priests. But yeah, let's see. Yeah, I'm definitely down. It would be cool if we all did it together, but we should do a video together on the Elephantine papyri. That would be really cool. Archaeohistory with a Dinger says Shalim was sacrificed by Shachar, similar to Cain or Canaan and Abel. Interesting. I think there's probably something to Canaan being connected, and it has a lot to do with the fact that Cain has a son named Enoch. And that Enoch, so Cain founds a city, and that city is called Enoch, and he names after his son. And one argument that I've heard is that the house of Enoch, or at least in Egyptian, would have been Pa'anok or Fa'anok. I don't know. It seems a bit of a stretch, but so you have Yerubal, but then you also hear it says Hirambalos. And so this seems like he's trying to translate into hero as in like sacred. But here, Hiram is from the root Hiram, which actually that means sacred as well. That's interesting. Both Hieros and Hiram both mean sacred or like set apart, because Hiram is the same root as Hiram or Haram. But so with this, I think this is probably a reference to Hiram, but let's see what else we have. Yeruval. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's either one of David's sons or Gideon. I forget which one. But yeah, Shalom sacrificed by Shachar, similar to Canon and Abel. So Shachar and Shalim. Oh, interesting. Yeah, so one of the twins sacrificed the other twin. Interesting. You'll have to send me info on that. I haven't heard of that, but I'd love to learn more. So I don't know if Cohen Klutz will be able to rejoin us, but if not, I'm just going to keep this going for a bit, and then I'll probably head off soon.
He dedicated his history to Abibalus, king of Berytus, and was approved by him and by the investigators.
And so I think this is like, it almost seems like they're inverting it, because they talk to the king of Tyre, who's named Hiram. And now here, it seems like Hiram Baal is the one who's the priest of Yehu, who's talking to the king, one of the kings of Phoenicia. Let's see. One second. One second. Let's see. Anyway, right here.
Truth in his time.
Probably went
now,
the restroom.
The times of these men fall even before the date of the Trojan War, and approach nearly to the times of Moses, as is shown by the succession of the kings of Phoenicia. And Sanchuniathon, who made a complete collection of ancient history from the records in various cities, from the registers in the temples, and wrote in the Phoenician language with a love of truth, lived in the reign of Semiramis, the queen of the Assyrians, who is recorded to have lived before the Trojan War, or in those very times. And the works of Sanchuniathon were translated into the Greek tongue by Philo of Byblos. So wrote Porphyry, bearing witness at once to the fruitfulness and antiquity of the so-called theologian. But he, as he goes forward, treats as divine not the God who is over all, nor yet the gods in heaven, but mortal men and women, not even refined in character, such as it would be right to approve for their virtue or emulate for their love of wisdom, but involved
what's
in
interesting
the dishonor
about that,
of every kind of violence.
One of the things that I
wickedness.
don't actually feel like I have enough space to include in the paper, in my capstone that I'm writing, but I think that this idea how he's writing, given this Porphyry, but he's right. It almost seems like this idea how he's talking about like these are mortals, but they're not even good mortals. That's what he's saying, where he's basically comparing them with the heroes of the Bible. Like, the patriarchs and the matriarchs. It's like, oh, these were so moral. Which, I mean, if you really look into their stories, they aren't as moral as we would see nowadays, because these stories aren't written as moral stories. They're written as symbolic stories and in some cases histories, but like to try to ascribe morality to places where it wasn't originally intended, you end up having to justify stuff like David sending was it Bathsheba's husband off to die in war and then marry her. You have, Abraham willing to sacrifice Isaac. You have Jacob betraying Esau, which was actually encouraged by his mother, Rebecca. The idea was put into his head by her. There's a lot of this stuff. And I think that trying to force morality into it ends up losing a lot of the context. And it also just ends up justifying things that shouldn't be justified. And I think, at the end of the day, it's something that it's so intrinsic to all monotheistic cultures nowadays that I don't think it's so easy to. And it's also one of those things that could have been retrojected into other traditions as a result of one tradition or another. So I think at the end of the day, it's like one of those burdens that the monotheistic tradition just has to carry and like to deal with. But at the end of the day, I think that it's definitely something that needs to be looked into more.
He testifies also that these are the very same who are still regarded as gods by all, both in the cities and in country districts. But let me give you the proofs out of his own writings. Philo, then, having divided the whole work of Sanchuniathon into 9 books, in the introduction of the first book, makes this preface concerning Sanchuniathon word for word. These things being so, Sanchuniathon, who was a man of much learning and great curiosity, and desirous of knowing the earliest history of all nations from the creation of the world, searched out with great care the history of Tautus, knowing that of all men under the sun, Tautus was the first who thought of the invention of letters, and began the writing of records. And he laid the foundation, as it were, of his history, by beginning with him whom the Egyptians call Toit, and the Alexandrians Thoth, translated by the Greeks into Hermes. After these statements, he finds fault with the more recent authors as violently and untruly reducing the legends concerning the gods to allegories and physical explanations and theories. And so he goes on to say, but the most recent of the writers on religion rejected the real events from the beginning, and having invented allegories and myths, and formed a fictitious affinity to the cosmical phenomena, established mysteries, and overlaid them with a cloud of absurdity, so that one cannot easily discern what really occurred. But he, having lighted upon the collection of secret writings of the Ammonians, which were discovered in the shrines, and of course were not known to all men, applied himself diligently to the study of them all. And when he had completed the investigation, he put aside the original myth and the allegories, and so completed his proposed work, until the priests, who followed in later times, wished to hide this away again, and to restore the mythical character, from which time mysticism began to rise up, not having previously reached the Greeks. These things I have discovered in my anxious desire to know the history of the Phoenicians, not that which is found among the Greeks, for that is contradictory, and compiled by some in a contentious spirit, rather than with a view to truth. And the conviction that the facts were as he has described them came to me on seeing the disagreement among the Greeks, concerning which I have carefully composed 3 books bearing the title Paradoxical History. But with a view to clearness hereafter, and the determination of particulars, it is necessary to state distinctly beforehand that the most ancient of the barbarians, and especially the Phoenicians and Egyptians, from whom the rest of mankind received their traditions, regarded as the greatest god those who had discovered the necessaries of life, or in some way done good to the nations. Esteeming these as benefactors and authors of many blessings, they worshipped them also as gods after their death, and built shrines, and consecrated pillars and staves after their names. These the Phoenicians held in great reverence, and assigned to them their greatest festivals. Especially, they applied the names
It definitely seems to be connected to the tradition of the Asherah poles and the staves that are used by the tribal leaders.
their kings to the elements of the cosmos, and to some of those who were regarded as gods. But they knew no other gods than those of nature, the sun, the
Oh,
moon,
welcome
and the
back.
rest of the wandering stars.
Oh, I can't. I can't really hear you right now. Maybe it might get better in a bit, but here, let's just continue. Hopefully, we'll get to the part that I wanted to talk a bit more about.
So that the gods were mortal, or immortal. Philo, having explained these points in his preface, next begins his interpretation of Sanchuniathon by setting forth the theology of the Phoenicians as follows. The first principle of the universe he supposes to have been air, dark with cloud and wind, or rather a blast of cloudy air and a turbid chaos, dark as Erebus. And these were boundless, and for long ages had no limit. But when the wind, says he, became enamored of its own parents, and a mixture took place, that connection was called desire. This was the beginning of the creation of all things. But the wind itself had no knowledge of its own creation. From its connection, Mot was produced, which some say is mud.
So this is something that I've kind of connected to this idea of like, well, we'll go into it more like another time, but basically this idea that in the beginning you have this dark wind. One second. Here, let me see if I can pull it up. Shoot, actually, yeah, can I? Oh, here, I actually have it here. So I'm just going to share this. This is a first draft, so I'm just going to here. So in his preface, Philo begins his interpretation of Sanchuniathon, and he presents the Phoenician theology roughly as follows. So here's where I start. He posits as the source of the universe. I connect that within the source, you have this idea of Bereshit bara Elohim, like was it as the source? So the beginning of the creation, or it's kind of hard here, but it gets more into it here, where you have a dark and windy gas, or a stream of dark gas, and turbid, gloomy chaos. These things were unbounded or chaotic, and for ages were without limit and limitless. And so I'm connecting this. Now the earth, which is these things, because this idea of the things that were created, which would be everything at that point, everything can be referred to as heaven and earth, like as it says in Hamlet. Then you also have, was this for ages were, that would just be haita. It was that they were unbounded, or what was this unbounded? For would connect to bohu, or chaotic, which is also connected to like to bow potentially, which is what's later given as the name of the wife of Colpius that later creates Aeon and Protogonos, which I personally connect to Adam and Eve. And we'll be able to go into this more depth later, but yeah, I'm just going to I have to use the restroom real quick, and then he had to drop again. Dang. Anyway, so I'll keep it going. I'll be right back.
And others a putrescence of watery compound. And out of this came every germ of creation and the generation of the universe. So there were certain animals which had no sensation, and out of them grew intelligent animals, and were called Zophasimen, that is, observers of heaven. And they were formed like the shape of an egg. Also, Mot burst forth into light, and sun, and moon, and stars, and the great constellations. Such was their cosmogony, introducing downright atheism. But let us see next how he states the generation of animals to have arisen. He says then, "And when the air burst into light, both the sea and the land became heated, and thence arose winds and clouds, and the very great downpours and floods of the waters of heaven. So after they were separated, and removed from their proper place because of the sun's heat, and all met together again in the air, dashing together one against another. Thunderings and lightnings were produced, and at the rattle of the thunder, the intelligent animals already described woke up, and were scared at the sound, and began to move both on land and sea, male and female." Such is their theory of the generation of animals. Next, after this, the same writer adds and says, "These things were found written in the cosmogony of Tautus, and in his commentaries, both from conjectures and from evidences which his intellect discerned and discovered and made clear to us." Next to this, after mentioning the names of the winds, Notus and Boreas and the rest, he continues, "But these were the first who consecrated the productions of the earth, and regarded them as gods, and worshipped them as being the support of life, both to themselves and to those who were to come after them, and to all before them, and they offered to them drink offerings and libations." He also adds, "These were their notions of worship, corresponding to their own weakness and timidity of soul." Then he says that from the wind Colpias and his wife Baal, which he translates night, were born Aeon and Protogonus, mortal men so called. And that Aeon discovered the food obtained from trees. That their offspring were called Genos and Genea, and inhabited Phoenicia, and that when droughts occurred, they stretched out their hands to heaven towards the sun. For him alone, he says, they regarded as God and the Lord of heaven, calling him Beelsamen, which is in the Phoenician language, Lord of heaven, and in Greek, Zeus. And after this, he charges the Greeks with error, saying, "For it is not without cause that we have explained these things in many ways, but in the view of later misinterpretations of the names in the history, which the Greeks in ignorance took in a wrong sense, being deceived by the ambiguity of the translation." Afterwards, he says, "From Genos, son of Aeon and Protogonus, were begotten again mortal children, whose names are light and fire and flame."
So this is what I'm arguing, that genos, because genos means to create or to be created. Cain or Cain means begotten or created. So they mean the same thing. Then you have the fact that guz and cuz are commonly shifted with consonant shifts. And on top of that, so then it's basically, now given, it would be genos, not gen. But at the root of genos is gen. So you have gen, you have ken. They mean the same thing, potentially shifted from one another. And then it said that that genos founded Phoenicia. And then you have Cain that founds Enoch, named after Enoch. And if there's a connection between Enoch and Phoenix or Phoenicia, then there might be something really interesting there. But
these, says he, discovered fire from rubbing pieces of wood together and taught the use of it. And they begat sons of surpassing size and stature, whose names were applied to the mountains which they occupied, so that from them were named Mount Cassius, and Libanus, and Antilibanus, and Brathi. From these, he says, were begotten Memrumus and Hypsurianus. And they got their names, he says, from their mothers, as the women in those days had free intercourse.
So
with any
Memrunus
whom
is
they met.
apparently Sememrunus, which is Semiramis. And then you have, what's it, Hypsorianos, which is heaps, which is like Hypsistos or higher, and then Urianos, heaven, so high heavens. So high heavens and Shamiram. I think, and high heavens, wait, Shamiram means high heavens. They both mean the same thing.
Hypsorianus inhabited Tyre, and contrived huts out of reeds and rushes and papyrus, and he quarrelled with his brother, Usus, who first invented a covering for the body from skins of wild beasts, which he was strong enough to capture. And when furious rains and winds occurred, the trees in Tyre were rubbed against each other, and caught fire, and burnt down the wood that was there. And Usus took a tree, and having stripped off the branches, was the first who ventured to embark on the sea. He consecrated 2 pillars to fire and wind, and worshipped them, and poured libations of blood upon them from the wild beasts, which he took in hunting. But when Hypsorianus and Usus were dead, those who were left, he says, consecrated staves to them, and year by year worshipped their pillars and kept festivals in their honor. But many years afterwards, from the race of Hypsorianus were born Agrius and Haliaeus, the inventors of hunting and fishing, from whom were named huntsmen and fishermen. And from them were born 2 brethren, discoverers of iron and the mode of working it, the one of whom, Chrysor, practiced
Also,
oratory
Cain-
and incantations and divinations.
So Chusor.
He was Hephaestus,
So
an inventor.
Cain can also mean smith. That's one of the other interpretations, which is interesting. But then you have Chusor, or Kusor, which I haven't actually found any etymology that supposes. Now, what's interesting is Chasar, or was it? Wait, Chasar. Sorry, no, it's Chusor. Wait, Chrisor. No, it's Chrusor. So Karas. So that, and he's an inventor of the hook. Now, Karas means hook in Semitic. So it's possible that his name Hook, his invention is named after him, or he's named after his invention. But saying this is Hephaestus.
Invented the hook and bait and line and raft, the mode of working it, the one of whom, Chrysor, practiced oratory and incantations and divinations. He was Hephaestus, and invented the hook and bait and line and raft, and was the first of all men to make a voyage, wherefore they reverenced him also as a god after his death. And he was also called Zeus Melikios, and some say that his brother invented walls of brick. Afterwards, there sprang from their race 2 youths, one of whom was called Technites, or artificer, and the other Genos Autochton, earthborn aboriginal. These devised their mixing of straw with the clay of bricks, and drying them in the sun, and moreover invented roofs. From them others were born, one of whom was called Agros, and the other Agroeros, or Agrotes. And of the latter there is in Phoenicia a much venerated statue, and a shrine drawn by yokes of oxen. And among the people of Byblos he is named preeminently the greatest of the gods. These 2 devised the addition to houses of courts and enclosures and caves. From them came husbandmen and huntsmen. They are also called Aletai and Titans. From these were born Aminos and Magus, who established villages and sheepfolds. From them came Mizor and Suduk, that is to say, straight and just. These discovered the use of salt. From Mizor was born Tautus, who invented the first written alphabet. The Egyptians called him Toit, the Alexandrians Thoth, and the Greeks Hermes. From Suduk came the Dioscuri, or Caberi, or Corybantes, or Samothraces. These, he says, first invented a ship. From them having sprung others who discovered herbs and the healing of venomous bites and charms. In their time is born a certain Eliun, called the Most High, and a female
That's
named
Elion.
Beirut.
Beirut,
And these
Beriat,
dwelt in the neighborhood
creation,
of
creation
Byblos.
in the heaven,
And from them
creation in the
is
Most
born
High,
Epigeus, or Autochthon, whom they afterwards called Uranus.
or
So that
Shemayim.
from him they named the element above us Uranus, because of the excellence of its beauty. and he has a sister born of the aforesaid parents, who was called Ge, Earth, and from her, he says, because of her beauty,
Alright.
they called the earth by the same name. And their father, the Most High, died in an encounter with wild beasts and was deified, and his children offered him libations and sacrifices. And Uranus, having succeeded to his father's rule, takes to himself in marriage his sister Ge, and gets by her 4 sons, Elus, who is also Kronos, and Baetalus, and Dagon, who is Ceton, offered him libations and sacrifices. And Uranus, having succeeded to his father's rule, takes to himself in marriage his sister Ge, and gets by her 4 sons, Elus, who is also Kronos, and Baetalus, and Dagon, who is Ceton, and Atlas. Also by other wives Uranus begat a numerous progeny, on which account Ge was angry, and from jealousy began to reproach Uranus, so that they even separated from each other. But Uranus, after he had left her, used to come upon her with violence whenever he chose, and consort with her, and go away again. He used to try also to destroy his children by her, but Ge lies. And when Kronos had advanced to manhood, he, with the counsel and help of Hermes Trismegistus, who was his secretary, repels his father Uranus and avenges his brother. To Kronos are born children, Persephone and Athena. The former died a virgin, but by the advice of Athena and Hermes, Kronos made a sickle and a spear of iron. Then Hermes talked magical words to the allies of Kronos, and inspired them with a desire of fighting against Uranus on behalf of Ge. And thus Kronos engaged in war, and drove Uranus from his government, and succeeded to the kingdom. Also, there was taken in the battle the beloved concubine of Uranus, being great with child, whom Kronos gave in marriage to Dagon. And in his house she gave birth to the child begotten of Uranus, which she named Damaris. After this, Kronos builds a wall round his own dwelling, and founds the first city, Byblos,
Mars is also
in Phoenicia.
Bala-Hadad.
Soon after this, he became suspicious of his own brother Atlas, and with the advice of Hermes, threw him into a deep pit, and buried him. At about this time, the descendants of the Dioscuri put together rafts and ships, and made voyages, and being cast ashore near Mount Cassius, consecrated a temple there. And the allies of Elis, who is Kronos, were surnamed Elohim, as these same, who were surnamed after Kronos, would have been called Chronii. And Kronos, having a son, Sadidus,
On that
dispatched
note,
him with his own sword,
that's where we're
because
going
he
to
regarded him with suspicion.
So it was fun. We'll definitely do this again, and hopefully do it when he's not being attacked by the storms. So on that note, it was good to see y'all. And where is it here? Oh, here.
Alei